Okay, we're going to flow through some of the main structures of the skull. So why don't we start with some of the main bones. So in the front, we have the frontal bone. If we look here, we have two parietal bones, one parietal and the other parietal. We then have a temporal bone around the ear. And in the back, where the back of the skull is, we have the occipital bone. So those are the main bones: frontal, parietals, temporal, occipital. Let's look at the sutures that separate these. Going across this way is the coronal suture. Running front to back is the sagittal suture. Around the temporal bone that separates the temporal from the parietal is the squamous suture. And on the back is the lambdoidal suture. Okay, we also have the maxilla, which is the upper jaw, and with the lower jaw is the mandible. Here's the orbit of the eye, and there's a foramen just above. Not best on this plastic model, but there's a foramen above and a foramen below. The one above is called the supraorbital foramen. The one below it is the infraorbital foramen. And there's another foramen on the mandible on both sides called the mental foramen. And the nerves that come through here is a cranial nerve number 5, called the trigeminal. Trigeminal means 3, and that nerve has 3 divisions. One to the ophthalmic division, one is the maxillary division, and the third division is the mandibular. So when you go to the dentist and they give you Novocaine, that's what they're trying to numb so they can work on the upper and lower jaw. This is the nasal bone. Inside the nasal bone, we have a vomer. And the upper part of that, right up in here, becomes the perpendicular plate. Right here, the perpendicular plate, which we can end up seeing that extends up, will extend up through the ethmoid bone, which protrudes right through the top. So this is the ethmoid bone, and that perpendicular plate, which breaks through the top of this, is called the, drawing a blank for a second, but it'll come to me. It's the crista galla. Thank you, the crista galla. And that would be similar to the flap that's on top of the rooster and chicken. That's what that means. Around the ethmoid, we have the cribriform plate, which are a bunch of perforated holes that we would see here. And that cribriform plate is where your olfactory bulbs, the olfactory nerve is your cranial nerve that deals with your sense of smell, comes right up and then goes into the brain. This is also where your frozen brain syndrome comes. If you drink or eat ice cream too fast, it stimulates that. You feel the pain between the eyes. It's because of the structure. Since we're on the inside, we could see the sphenoid bone in here. Sphenoid looks like the bat bone or the butterfly bone. So this is the sphenoid. This is the ethmoid. This structure here, which is in the sphenoid bone, is called the hypophyseal fossa. Hypophysis is like pituitary, so your pituitary gland sits here. The structure itself is called the sella turcica, which means Turkish saddle. That's this whole entire structure, but this depression is the hypophyseal fossa. So, being that the pituitary gland sits here, here is a foramen. Could you hand me a stick right there? Thank you. If I put these 2 sticks through these foramen, through the optic foramen is where your optic nerves travel. That's your second cranial nerve. Now, if there's a pituitary tumor, you can understand how it can hit the optic nerve at the crisscross, which is referred to as the optic chiasm, and it can create some visual disturbances. So that was just an interesting clinical point I'd point out. If I put the sticks and we look at it from the front, we could see where the optic foramen is in the front. Okay. Or the optic canal, same thing. Okay, what other structures do we have here in the front? Let's take a look. We have the foramen rotundum, foramen ovale, and foramen spinosum. Those three.
Can you show on the other side?
On the other side, foramen ovale, foramen rotundum, foramen ovale, foramen spinosum. This is called the foramen lacerum, meaning it's lacerated, like cut like a knife, very irregular. This large hole right here is the magnum foramen. That's where the medulla oblongata travels down, which is the extension of the brain. This hole here is the internal auditory meatus, and if there's an internal auditory meatus, there's an external auditory meatus. That's the hole in your ear. The EAM, the external auditory meatus, the EAM of the EAR. Okay? Okay, let's continue here. This is the zygomatic bone, the zygomatic arch. We said this is the mandible. The mandible has a mandibular condyle, and that mandibular condyle articulates with the mandibular fossa. This is what your TMJ is when you chew. TMJ stands for temporal mandibular joint, TMJ. And this is a coronoid process right up here. This is the angle of the mandible. And let's see what else we have. We said the nasal bone. We have a lacrimal bone here. Lacrimal, which is where your tear ducts are. In the nose, we have concha or turbinates. This is the inferior nasal concha and the superior nasal concha. There should be a middle, but since this one is not showing it too well, we'll say this is the inferior and superior. And what these concha or turbinates do is when you breathe in the air, it spins it, it warms it, and filters it and cleans it out for us. So those are important structures. Here is the palatine bone, or the hard palate. Right. Here is the mastoid process and the styloid process. Mastoid process, styloid process. External auditory meatus. Occipital condyles are here, which will articulate with the first cervical vertebrae, C1 or atlas. Also on the occiput in the back, we have something called Nuchal lines. So this looks like a Nuchal line. This looks like a Nuchal line, so we can call this the inferior Nuchal line and a superior Nuchal line. And that prominent little bump right there is called the external occipital protuberance. Okay. So those are some of the major bony landmarks to familiarize yourself with, and thank you.